No one has claimed this. Do I hear $10? It's not you. You leave one for me, Henk.
Oh.
Leave one for me.
No.
Please, how about there? These folks have come from various distances, and we appreciate them taking the time. This is the session to talk about Rebuild by Design. And it was interesting that Greg Clark this morning challenged us and said, where is the federal government in its intervention and its engagement and its investment in cities? And Rebuild by Design is a great example of the engagement of the federal government. And I'm joined by Henk Ovink, who's from the Dutch government, actually, a secondment. He's come back to New Amsterdam. We appreciate that. And he's going to talk to us about how Rebuild by Design was conceived. And then joining him is Klinenberg from NYU, Mindy Fullilove from Columbia, and Julie Bargmann from her own firm, who's on the jury of Rebuild by Design. You saw this slide when I was doing the little intro. We're going to encourage you to go to rebuildbydesign.org, and you can learn all about this process. It's in its third month. It's going on for a few more yet. MAS is pleased to be working with NYU and with the Regional Plan Association and with the Van Allen Institute to help support this process. And interestingly, not only is the federal government engaged, but also a group of funders that have stepped up, which is the common vernacular. They have stepped up to support this initiative, and there they are, and I wanted to make sure that you saw them acknowledged because they have been extraordinarily engaged in this and demonstrative with their resources and their skills in making this process as collaborative as it could possibly be. Henk and Eric have rushed here from simultaneously, I think you may have heard Dr. Roden mention it, that today and yesterday there's been a whole resilience conference going on concurrently at Jamaica Bay, and both Henk and Eric were involved in that, and so they've rushed themselves here, and Mindy came from a conference in Pittsburgh, so we appreciate the three of them. And then Julie's been my buddy in the green room for the day, enjoying orienting herself to this whole process and taking us all in. So we're going to have a chat with all of them, but Henk's going to start by telling us about the genesis of RBD. And do you want to do it from here, or are you going to do it right from there?
Whatever. Yeah, I don't know. So this works, I guess.
It does.
Yeah, resiliency by design. That's what Rebuild by Design is for. We took public transportation, not the car. So that's good. First Lady Michelle Obama speaking a little while ago, 3 weeks ago at the Cooper Hewitt Design Awards ceremony, actually said that the president wants to be an architect. So we all know after his second term is ended, he will either apply for GSAPP or GSD or any other architecture school. And I don't want to make fun of it, but it shows something that's important about architecture or design or the way we perceive it, and that's the political meaning of it. There's a very other argument why we do Rebuild by Design, and that is all issues, social, cultural, economically, ecological, have a spatial impact. And this spatial impact makes it very relevant to actually work on the spatial side of it, being a planner, being an urban designer, or being an architect. At the same time, we know, and this slide is all screwed up, I already see, is that every impact on a generic sense, when it comes to climate change or poverty, when it comes to economic development in a positive or a negative sense, has these generic developments have a very specific impact everywhere. So the specificness of place, as well as the genericness of the issues at stake, make it very, very relevant to focus on place. Then there's the other aspect of design that makes it very much possible to look back and remember and not copy-paste, and at the same time look ahead in scenarios, in studies, and in envisioning your future. The blue arrow in this is actually our political system. We only respond or react on a day-to-day basis. That can be very non-intelligent, but it could also be loaded with intelligence if you place it in this broader perspective. So that's what design and the planning process is actually about. But it does mean a changing role for everybody. This is not about the normal places. So the only way to escape the formal system is to create alliances or collaborations with the formal and informal actors in place. Now, Sandy hit New York hard, and it created a momentum. And although it was a devastating disaster, at the same time, if you don't exploit that momentum to create time and room for a little bypass out of normal negotiations, out of the normal system, out of our normal rules and regulations. If you don't use that time to create that bypass and invest in innovation, you will never get to that longer stretch of perspective. Shaun Donovan really got that momentum. He was appointed chair of the Hurricane Sandy Rebuilding Task Force, went to the Netherlands and picked me up in a new tube line of the subway of Amsterdam. He brought me back here, and now we developed the Hurricane Sandy rebuilding strategy. If you add this all up, you get Rebuild by Design. And Rebuild by Design is totally different because of the process, the talent that's involved, and the funding. The process is talking about competitions. Most of the time is, this is a problem, throw it in society, solve it for us. Most of the time, government does that because they don't know what to do. What we said is, the problem is so complex, we don't know what it is. So we need time. Give us time to find out what this problem is. This region is so complex, climate change is complex, sea level rise is complex, storms, economic issues are complex, and everything comes together. So we designed the process to not say, this is the problem, solve it, but to say, what's the problem? So the first phase we're in the midst of, and Eric is leading that as a research director, is research. So we asked for talent. We got 148 teams from all over the world, all interdisciplinary. We selected 10 that were the top notch of everything, but also covered every issue at stake in this region. And we have now 184 people, it's like a school, working on the region. And the funding of the process is done by the private organization. That was good. We had a federal shutdown. I'm Dutch. I'm not involved in that. Private is not involved in that, so Rebuild by Design got going. But in the end, the funding is also the driver for everybody involved, because the federal government does put in CDBG-DR dollars, and it's going to be a lot of dollars to actually implement not one project, but all 10. Because this is not a competition for one winner, it's a competition to build back this region more resilient. 5 minutes.
Oh, I'm telling you, you were right on the money there. The Dutch know how to tell time. He was right on the money there. Eric, you obviously got the summit memo, which is that at least one panelist per session has to wear colorful socks. Have you noticed that? We've had one panel member per session with colorful socks. NYU has headed up the research phase.
Yep.
Talk to us about that. Tell us what you've been learning, what surprised you.
Well, it's been very exciting for us. I direct something called the Institute for Public Knowledge at NYU. We do primarily social science and are interested in taking the things we know about in the university and sharing them with the public and generating conversations that reinforce each other so that we can learn from the public as well. We got a call from Henk, who had read this article I did in the New Yorker about the social infrastructure, essentially making the argument that so often we think that there's a hard infrastructure that's going to engineer a solution to a problem like climate change or storm surge, when in fact there's really a social dimension to these things that determines life and death. So I've been making the case that we need to add a layer to the conventional debate we have about how to build. It's not just about building structures, it's also about building social and human infrastructures. And so what's been really exciting for NYU and this team of experts that Mindy Fullilove is a part of is we have taken these design teams from all over the world to every part of the region to try to understand the needs and the challenges as well as the possibilities for this next moment when we're going to not build back what we had before, but build forward and think about pro-building a region that can really work given the kinds of threats that we have. So maybe we can get into some of the specific issues later, but for us it's been interdisciplinary. Our research network involves people from the best universities in this area, and it's been a process where the designers have been in an active dialogue with social scientists and planners who are thinking about the kind of analysis you have to do before you can even think about building something.
I wonder if it'd be useful, Henk, for you just to explain to people the teams themselves. They're quite diverse. Do you want to just give people that picture and then we'll go to Mindy?
We got 148 teams applying for working with us, actually competing to work with us. The first was actually a PDF from a concrete factory. I got a little worried then. The second was an artist from Arizona, and I don't mind artists from Arizona, but for the Rebuild by Design competition, we wanted interdisciplinary teams. We specifically said that, interdisciplinary teams, and we made that precise, what that really meant. The teams in their argumentation not only had to say this is what we want to do, but they had to draft a narrative on what interdisciplinary meant to them. Because I wanted to know how they would engage to the issues at stake in this region. So we selected 10 of the best, but there are also 10 different. So some of the teams have a strong composition of people from the science world and landscape architecture and ecological dimensions on the bigger ecological systems. And they do research on how this region works from an ecological perspective, trying to tie it up with climate change, sea level rise, urban development, and come up with the vulnerabilities that, if you work on them, would actually have an impact on the regional scale. And some actually are more architecture focused. They develop these centers for resilience that could be, like Eric described in his last article in the New York Times, the library that turns into a hotspot when there is a disaster. So it's very architectural. So from ecologists, landscape architects, urban designers, architects, to small-scale, very innovative solutions that can be replicable across the region. I've been working with the teams the last 2 days on one-on-ones. I've got this luxury position that I can actually do that for work. And it's been fascinating to sit with the teams again. We do that every week, but not so intense as the last 2 days. Sit with these teams and go over where they are right now. And they actually cover, it's hard to say they cover everything, but they cover quite a lot when it comes to the systems of this region and the way you can actually work on them and create impacts that have a longer lasting impact. And what's important, they create a new standard of rebuilding. The hardest thing of this competition will be, we understand very well, but it's still going to be very hard. We want to be innovative. Now there's two gaps between innovative and implementation. One is that rules and regulations are never, they will never be able to meet with innovation because they're always, when you're innovative, you have to break the rules. And the second is that building support for solutions nobody knows is also very crucial. So the next phase, we're going to talk about it, is really going to be about both engaging everybody in this region to build coalitions and at the same time engaging the government to change their policies to make this innovative implementation actually work.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this has been an interesting process. Some of you may have been part of some of the public sessions that have been done by RBD as it's gone around. So not only do you have teams that have different partners, often from different parts of the world, so the teams themselves have to coordinate their efforts. Then on top of that, through Eric's process, he's had interdisciplinary working groups. So somebody from Team A is working with Team B, working with Team C. And so it's been quite a noisy kind of process. And what's interesting about that, too, is that in addition to it being about design, it's been about community. And it's about interacting with community. And Mindy, I'm wondering if you want to comment, because you've been working with these teams in the community. Let's hear from you. You're no stranger to the summit stage. Welcome back. Well, I was glad to have you here. And to talk a little bit about that interface, the community input with the design process.
The Rebuild by Design process is very intense, and the part of it has been, you think about designers kind of in a studio drawing something, but this has been a process of getting to know a region. The scope of this disaster of the Superstorm Sandy is really from Connecticut all the way down the Jersey shores, what's encompassed in Rebuild by Design. And so to really begin to think about this, the teams have gone to the sites, and it's not one site. It's not like there was a tornado in one place, so they have to go, they started, I think the very first site visit was to Hoboken, is that right? The very first site visit was to Hoboken. They've been to the Lower East Side, down the Jersey Shore, to Staten Island, to Red Hook, and
Bridgeport.
all the way out to Long Island, and then up to Bridgeport, Connecticut. Think about the scope of that, the different textures of those communities. So, shore kind of communities like Asbury Park, which are, very much leisure, recreation places, and then how different that is from Hoboken, New Jersey, very dense urban, but huge flooding. So the problems and the scope have been enormous, and in all of those places, it's been an opportunity to talk to mayors, to talk to citizens, to walk around, to get the feel of the place, to see kind of the impact of the storm. So, and it's, for me, I'm a psychiatrist, and so of course I like to watch people, and it's interesting to me to watch all these engineers and architects and designers go into a space. There was one moment in Bridgeport when Sam, who works with Eric, it was sort of the end of the day and everybody was at the beach, and Sam kind of let them go. And I was like, Sam, I don't think you should let these people go, because they were all going out to see the beach, to see the shore. They were so curious about the space, and they were all going in different directions. So we will never leave. So we have to round them up. And it's extremely fascinating to watch their curiosity and how hungry they are to take in the scope of the problem, and then to try to figure out the graphics so that they can talk to us about what it is that they've seen, this analysis of the problem. And some of the graphics that you'll be seeing are some of the kinds of things they've been generating. And again, for me, I live in West Orange, New Jersey, so Superstorm Sandy for us was a problem of fallen trees, and our trains were out and there was no gas. So, it was very, very intense, but those were our problems. But every place we go, they're different problems. So it's accumulating all these stories and then trying to make, like this, a collective story. What's our collective story, the community of all of us? It's been an extraordinary, extraordinary event of going beyond our usual ways of seeing and going with 180 really skilled observers who have the talent to then say to us, this is what's going on. It's going to be the breadth and the depth of it are going to give us a whole new way of understanding our region.
So at the previous session, or maybe it was 2 sessions before, PK Das from Mumbai talked about the democratization. How do we democratize this process? And you've been an advocate for that through RBD, and you talked specifically about how could the designers visualize what they were doing so that the communities could actually see, that it wasn't hidden. Do you want to talk a little bit about your notion of the sketchbook and your experience with that?
I'd love to, Mary.
Oh, I thought you might.
In the course of working with designers, I came across an architecture group in Pittsburgh called Rothschild Doyle Collaborative that had developed this technique they called design sketchbook, which was really to take legal-size sheets of paper and make designs like that. And the point of design sketchbook, the way they use it, is to take all the concepts that are evolving in the course of a design process so that they are tracking what's happening, but also finding ways to express the ideas. And the reason I thought this was so important for Rebuild by Design is that it allows us, the public, to see all the threads of the issues. There's so many threads of this process. There's concentrated urban areas where there's sewage, electricity, rail, all these problems right at a harbor. There's resort communities. There's how much sea level rise. So each of these layers and all the many more, we need to be able to follow the thinking as it has evolved. And so this gives us a way for us to stay in touch and to create real transparency of the issues. So there are many of these design sketchbooks, both that the teams have made and that the working groups, that these cross-team interchanges have made, which will help us see what they see. And that means that we can become really informed participants in the decision-making. And in the next phase of Rebuild by Design, the teams will be going out into communities, and they'll have this packet of tools, these visuals, to help us see the region and see the problems in a way we've never seen it before. We had one really interesting experience in Bridgeport. We're standing on the shore, And in fact, when you see the photo of all the people under the house, it started to rain while we were on the shore in Connecticut, and so we all went under the house, which had just been lifted up. It was funny. So right there, the mayor of that town was explaining that they had put in a little jetty, and the jetty had changed the action of the waves and taken all the sand from that point and moved it to the other end of the beach. So this really is one of those small reminders that any town that does anything is going to affect everybody else. And so this whole, like, we need to be in concert was brought home to us over and over again, both by seeing these things laid out in this new way and by going to visit all these places.
Can I just say one
Sure,
quick,
yeah.
very quick thing about the October 28th event? It's part of the participatory process. So the invitation Mary issued to come to NYU at 8 in the morning and
I haven't issued it yet, but I'm going to.
which she will issue soon.
You can issue it now.
Come to NYU at 8 a.m.
Be there.
October 28th. The teams will be unveiling the 3 to 5 design opportunities that they've identified as a result of this 3-month process that we've been undertaking together. And so it is precisely not the kind of federal project where there's a kind of call for proposals and a bunch of contractors and engineering firms that do work in this industry, use their connections to get projects pre-approved, which then, I'm not referring to a specific historic example of a place that we can think of in this country, of course. This is just an arbitrary example, but we're really trying to do this in a way that solicits input from the people in the areas where the designers are going and from people who live here more generally, because it's a unique and extraordinary moment to change the way we relate to the environment and to rebuild this region with real federal resources. And if we do it the way we did it after Katrina, we're in trouble. Or if we rebuild for climate security the way we rebuilt for homeland security after September 11th, we'll be in trouble. And the threat that we face is formidable and just as serious as the threat that we were dealing with after September 11th. So we need to come up with designs that protect us from the extremes, but also improve the quality of our lives every day. And we won't do that if it's just designers and social scientists talking to each other. We'll only do that if we have as much participation as possible. So this is an invitation not just for you to come, because you're the kinds of people who like to go to these things, but to tell people and spread the word. This process will be going on for some time, and it will be all the better to the extent that we have more voices.
So let's talk about design, because it's interesting. The intervention you chose was design. It wasn't resilience by participation or resilience by edict, or it was resilience by design. And I'm interested to draw Julie into the conversation, because you've been outside from the process. You're going to be more engaged because you sit on the jury. Very important. So talk to us a bit about this. You've done design for years. You're from Charlottesville, one of my favorite towns. And what are your sort of observations in this big experiment that Henk has dragged us all into?
Well, it's very related to what you were saying about visualization, because I do think that, designers are always thought of as making stuff.
Yeah.
But the power to visualize, to educate, and to think regionally, because designers, and others, but designers especially more and more, think about systems, and they know they have to act, system-wide. You even look at some of the drawings there, the mapping, and it's great that they named the towns. I didn't see any state names.
Right.
Right? So there's thinking across, state lines. It's not jurisdictional. And so a lot of talk now is like, well, let's get the jurisdictional, straitjackets off.
So let's talk about that for a bit, because for the benefit of those of you that have been out in other vineyards today, here we heard Greg Clark throw out that gauntlet and say, New York, to be competitive globally, needs to be thinking really seriously about regional governance. Some of us always try to say governance as opposed to governments. Did you get my consonant change there? So we need other mechanisms. And what's interesting, and Henk was just whispering to me, are we going to talk about the region? Because the scope of Rebuild by Design is not traditional jurisdictions. It's blurring urban and rural, it's blurring small town, and it's blurring commercial and residential, vacation and full-time residencies. It's a really interesting ecological picture of how nature chose to intervene. And I guess you're telling me as a designer you're more comfortable with that.
Yeah,
You guys think that way every morning.
yeah.
Okay then. Hank, talk to us about
Some of us anyway. I mean, you know, I think we still have that stigma, you know, of making stuff. And actually, I have quite the harangue of, you know, kind of being anti-stuff. Because, you know, I believe what's really interesting, and the design teams are demonstrating this, is that they design process and work with processes.
It's about the journey, not the
But,
destination.
you know, so in a lot of ways, you know, the processes they'll be designing kind of for these communities and the region is part of the resiliency,
Right.
you know, for the communities, you know, who now can see themselves within the larger, you know, they're like front porch, you know, and that's what, you know, I think, you know, we pride ourselves on is, you know, I often call it the thrill cam or the powers of 10, you know, to know that the systems do affect everything from a bay to a front porch. And to me, that's what this, you know, rebuild by design is all about. And of
All the
course,
different
Shaun,
scales.
Of course, Shaun Donovan knows that because he was educated as an architect.
Yes. And he's from the region. He's a New York City born and raised kid, and went to Harvard and got back again. But he also understands the city in a regional perspective. And the teams show, and none of the drawings actually emphasize the state line. But we all know, although we don't want to, it's hard to acknowledge that New York City without Chris Christie is gone. So it's a really weird thing.
I don't think people quite heard that. You might say it a bit more slowly.
Or at least explain
You gotta
that idea.
And on the other side of the water, there's stuff and people.
Julie's people.
And if you look at the plans that are formally, and I understand it, but if you read, what the scariest thing, the scariest image I ever saw was the New York State plan that actually had like a void outside of the state. It's like there was nothing.
Yeah.
And I mean, I understand that you're not governing the other, but hey, you're totally dependent on and the other way around. So all interdependencies when it comes to waste, transportation, energy, labor, people live there that work in this city, and public transportation as well as freight, is there in the Meadowlands and Jersey City and Hoboken, and it's not New York City territory. And that area is again very much dependent on smaller cities around either the coast or more inland. So the system approach the designers take together with the scientists and the engineers actually shows this very fine structure this whole region consists of, and where you should, pull the strings to make something happen. And that string could be, it could be in New York, but it could also be in Jersey. And something in Asbury Park could actually change something that's a little up, on the Highland or even Staten Island. And all of a sudden you're changing the way you think about power and politics by design. And I must say, we work a lot with mayors. Any mayor, small or big, not in size of the person, but in size of the city. They all understand this interdependency, but it's also very hard to take that into account. And then there's counties. You could say, hey, that's like these little sub-regions that are, sometimes totally meaningless and sometimes actually can make a difference. And it all depends, again, on the capacity of the people that are there. And then you have the more functional, like the water, we call them water boards, but the water areas where you, where governance is actually organized functionally instead of politically. Well, they don't really make a difference, you could say. So if you add all these layers up, and you we are not in the ability by RBD to change any of that, but we can change a culture of collaboration amongst those layers, and we might create more sense that the regional scale is actually the scale that's so important that it asks a little more than saying, well, we have MTA or the Transport Authority that, because that doesn't work. Putting the problem of the region outside of your scope of action is actually a dumb excuse. Yeah.
From your lips to God's ears. Let's talk about a tough thing. Let's talk about money.
Huh?
Can we,
You want to talk about something before we talk about money? Yes, go.
I know, I was going to ask if the Wizard of Oz back there could put the slideshow back on, and we could, just so people could see some of those regional slides
Known
again.
as Alexis. Alexis, the Wizard of Oz. We'll put the slideshow
Are you the
back
Wizard of Oz? Thanks, Alexis.
While the slides come back on, here's what I think
Money.
we need to talk a little bit about. There's probably not enough money to build everything that Julie wants to design and build and create all the social infrastructure that Eric wants.
But she's not into things. So
Yes,
it
she's
might-
not into things. She wants a process. Well, I don't know if is there enough money to build your process. I just wonder if here's your scene, Mindy.
This is the
Mindy
mayor and the
standing underneath
the
the
teams.
So if you look,
That's
if
tough.
you look to your left, that's the jetty that changed how the waves went, and then all the water was, the water washed all the sand down to the other end of the beach. So just that little thing changed the movement
Right.
for this whole huge area. And that's like really underlying this whole philosophy of we have to think about the region. Asbury Park has something to do with, this is Milford, Connecticut, they're connected. So, but this is kind of mind-boggling.
So
But
now,
to-
now imagine a $20 billion Seagate that spans the harbor.
Yeah.
Right, so where does that water go? And where does that sediment go?
And where does that money come from? In the
Hank.
first place.
It comes from
I got to
Hank.
get my thing in.
No, so now the money question. You say there's never enough money. I say that's a total wrong perspective on money.
Okay.
There's so much money, but if you say, has the federal government enough money to build the world? No, of course not. Luckily, we had the shutdown, remember? There was no money. We almost had no money at all. We don't actually have money because we borrow everything. That's why we, almost had a default. So there is sandy money. So the Congress actually allocated 60 billion, and after sequestration, it turned to be 58. And for CDBG D.R., now it's getting complex, which is block grant money from the Housing and Urban Development Department. There was 15 billion, and we put 5 billion in the region already. So you could say, oh, there's like billions, and there's going to be lots of money also for Build by Design. But the other side of this argument is that these teams do research. They will come up with 50 opportunities to focus on. We can only facilitate 10 of them. They could easily come up with 100 opportunities, although 50 could be very crucial. And there's already a lot of engagement locally by partners that might be private or might be not, might be government, that actually say we need those opportunities to work on, because there's a lot of development in this region. If you look at the numbers of money that's going on in this region, we could build anything we want. The question is, do we build it right or do we build it wrong? So Rebuild by Design actually delivers you a lot of knowledge on the regional scale as on the very local, on how you go forward in building this region more resilient. And there's a lot of money for that. So the knowledge that's out there has to be connected to the normal processes, and the people are now building anything there at any day.
So just to recap the process, so is it process? I forget my Canadian,
yeah.
thank you, the
Yeah.
European.
Yeah.
On the 28th, the teams that have been working for 3 months provide 3 to 5 design opportunities. They've been critiqued. They've had all sorts of rigor back and forth. They present those on the 28th, first thing in the morning, coffee on Eric, 8 o'clock at NYU. Then there's quite a process all day, and then they go to New Jersey and they do the same thing. Then there's some kind of a deliberative process, and through the federal government, there's a decision made, or some tough choices are made. And then on the 1st of November, each design team has an initiative that they will then take to the next stage. Henk, tell us what you're hoping will happen after that.
So every team has one opportunity, which is not really a project yet. It's like, this is what makes sense out of the research that will have a regional impact. Either it's big in scale or big in impact, or it's small in scale and impact, but replicable across the region, and therefore has a bigger impact. Then the hard thing starts, because these teams have to work on these opportunities to become designs, work on these opportunities with the local stakeholders or the regional stakeholders. And I've seen proposals. I already have I mean, these two governors' offices are going to have a hard time with some of these teams, and so will we, because they cross the boundary of New Jersey and New York, or New York and Connecticut, or on the local scale, we have to start to get mayors together to make them work. But what happens is they will have to build a coalition of the teams. We facilitate, MES, Van Allen Institute, and RPA. NYU IPK is still there, making sure we do the right thing. So to get in the research advisory group, we might, still call, and there's the jury. So there's a lot of knowledge. But these teams have to develop these coalitions themselves with the people in the region and develop these designs. So innovation in design development and innovation in coalition forming have to go together. And then week by week, day by day, week by week, month by month, they will develop this design further and further until it's like a preliminary design phase in the end of March, where there's support or non-support, but then we know what's going on. Then we know what the blocks are in rules and regulations and why it can't be implemented, or what we have to do to get it implemented. And we got a sense of the amount of dollars that we need to allocate. And sometimes it could be that the federal government would put in $100 million to kickstart a far bigger process, or $10,000 of dollars to kickstart a far. It depends. Or it could be that the project is like an exemplary project. We could build this community center. There's funding, or build this dune or dam or oyster reef, or
All of that.
all of that.
So Eric and Mindy, you've been at the center of it. March next year. It isn't just the Northeast that's struggling with this. All of the country is struggling with these issues. Around the world, we have these challenges. Do you think we're going to have created a new process of understanding this?
So I don't know that it's a new process, but it's a process that can work very well to generate innovation and participation. Strangely, I had a meeting with the governor of Colorado last week, and Colorado is prone to these massive fires and incredible and devastating flooding. And he asked me about Rebuild by Design, and I started to explain the nature of the competition as a mechanism for soliciting ideas that could be used not just for one problem in one place, but to generate strategies for dealing with a wide range of problems. And immediately, his eyes lit up. And I think he's now thinking about generating something like that there. And Colorado, as a state, is dealing with risks that it shares with its neighboring states.
Yeah.
So there's possibilities for regional cooperation at that level. So the process, for sure, is powerful. And I'm, fairly sanguine about the possibility that some of the projects that we help to develop concretely will become models for other places as well. I mean, this is not the only region that's got to deal with the threat of climate change. And whether you're thinking about storm surges or the kind of social infrastructure that will help people make connections to their neighbors so they can provide support during heat waves or other emergencies, or frankly every day, this is now, in my view, the problem of our time. And so when you bring up a question about money or process, I can't help but refer back to that moment on September 11th when the world changed and our spending priorities changed. And if I asked any one of you to give me an estimate at how much money we have spent to make the world feel safer since September 11th, how would you even go about answering that question? Would you restrict yourself to thinking about the fact that we created the Department of Homeland Security and merged 22 federal agencies and 185,000 employees? Or would you be more open and start bringing in the cost of the wars that we have fought in the wake of that event? And now, the question for us is, how seriously do we take the challenge of climate change? To what extent do we think that we now have to build our cities and our regions and our organizations, our institutions, our neighborhoods to manage whatever is coming next? And the answer to that question is going to determine a lot about the significance of Rebuild by Design and the individual projects that come out of this and this conversation. So, the reason that we went all in on this and have thrown ourselves into this ridiculous amount of work that we have done over the last 3 months is because I just can't think of a more exciting and innovative project, and I'm still pinching myself to remember that this is coming from the federal government.
Well, one of the language that we use at MAS is that it's about all hands on deck, that it has to be a mobilization across sectors, across every kind of difference. And it's interesting to have a psychiatrist working alongside a sociologist, next to an architect, next to a designer. Julie, you're hopeful about design in the process, I hear that.
Yeah.
Any other sort of observations as you watch RBD move into the next phase?
Yeah, I have to say, just a preliminary look at some of the research questions that the teams put together is, really, there's all the talk and the phenomenon of interdisciplinary teams, which is fantastic. And it's actually, ridiculously, more recent phenomenon. Still, there's some that I felt still need to connect some dots between to really have a holistic approach.
Right.
They mentioned one issue, but then what the research was going to be, there was a disconnect.
Yeah.
So...
They got 10 more days.
Yeah.
No, but I think there's a weaving in the process, and I hear you. It is a pretty impressive thing, though, when you look at the resources of the Rebuild by Design teams and all the resource group people, the academics, Jeannie, our board chair, has been one of them, a number of other folks that Eric brought together, all the community input. I mean, it's a staggering amount of engagement so far, and it's only going to get more intense. So it's, in many ways, the opportunity for us. Maybe Sandy gave us a bit of a perverse opportunity to really embrace these issues and face them head on. Mindy, are you hopeful? It's always dangerous to ask a psychiatrist if they're hopeful.
I think in New Jersey, we got hit by Irene, Snowtober, Sandy, Nemo. It was a wake-up call. It was a tipping point in our consciousness. The water is coming. Times have changed. And I think the federal government has met our fears and our despair with a very serious answer. We can do this together. I'm all in.
And so are we. Would you join me in what we think we Rebuild by Design?